Today, the fashion industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Here in Colossians chapter 3, Paul is going to talk to us about what to wear. Welcome to the 2020 New Testament Challenge. As Christians, what do we wear? Paul's going to talk to us about what we need to take off and what we need to put on. In verse 8, this is what Paul says. But now we must rid ourselves of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from our lips. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices, and you put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge and in the image of its creator. Paul is saying here that there are things that we need to get rid of, that we need to take off. They're part of our old self. Those would include anger and rage, malice, slander, and filthy language. Those things do not fit with a Christian any longer. We need to get rid of those things. If they're in your closet, they need to be thrown away. That is not appropriate for God's children any longer. But what should we be clothing ourselves with? He tells us in verse 12. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. We are to clothe ourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Those are always fitting upon a Christian because that's what people need to see. And then he says in verse 13 that we need to bear with each other. That simply means we need to cut each other slack. We need to give the benefit of the doubt. In other words, we are not perfect and the other person's not perfect, so we need to give each other some opportunity to make things right. We need to forgive just like Jesus forgave us. That's a tall order, but that's what God is calling us to. We need to remember, what has God forgiven us for? And then we need to be thankful. And if God has forgiven us, then we need to be forgiving of others in the same way. And then in verse 14, we read that we should, over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. When we put on love, then that binds everything together. It's almost like a belt that holds everything in place. That's what love is. So what is it that the best dressed Christians are wearing today? It's kindness and compassion. It's humility. It's gentleness. It's patience. And it is love. Well, how in the world do we put all of that together? He tells us in verse 15, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you were called to peace, and be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, and as you sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God. So how do we put all of this together so that it works? He tells us we have to have the peace of Christ ruling in our hearts. And when that takes place, we're going to be thankful because we're going to remember where God has taken us from. And we're giving him control of our life so we'll have the peace of God dwelling within us. And then we're having the word of Christ dwell within us. We are listening to what he says and we're doing what he says. And we are speaking with gratitude. That's what the best dressed Christians are wearing that are making a difference in this world. So, what is Paul telling us? Put off the old self and put on the new. And when we do, God will be glorified. Thank you for joining the 2020 New Testament Challenge.